She was 18 years old, and she had been thrown out with nothing. No home to return to, no money in any bank, no soul left who was bound by blood or duty to keep her. Just a flour sack bundle, her mother's tin thimble, and 10 worn dollars knotted into a corner of her shawl. And with those $10, she bought a broken-down livery stable at the low end of a dying cattle town in the Montana Territory. A long, sagging barn the whole town had used for 30 years as a place to be forgotten. The roof leaked. Half the stalls had rotted through. Grown men leaned on the corral rail and laughed and said the girl had bought herself a pile of kindling that happened to be standing up. But what nobody knew, what no living person had known in a quarter century, was that up in the hayloft of that old stable, sealed away in the dark under the eaves, was something that would change her life forever. Before we go on, if stories like this one mean something to you, take a moment and hit subscribe, then tell us down in the comments where you're watching from tonight. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Her name was Winifred Barlow, though the few people who ever loved her had only ever called her Fred. And by the time she was 18, there was no one left to call her anything at all. She was born in a plank house on the edge of Ryegate, a hard little cattle town out on the Montana grass where the wind ran 1,000 miles without meeting a hill to break it, and the winters came down white and total and did not let go until they were good and ready. Her mother, Alma, sewed for the whole town. Every wedding dress and shroud and Sunday shirt in Ryegate had passed under her needle, and she had a way of talking soft to her work, coaxing it that a person could feel in the room even from across it. Her father had gone before Fred could hold a memory of him, thrown from a green horse onto frozen ground, the way this country took its men, and so it had always been the two of them, mother and daughter, in a house that was poor but never once unkind. There is a thing that runs in some children long before they have the word for it, and in Fred, it ran toward horses, toward the great patient nervous animals that everyone else in Ryegate valued only for what work could be beaten out of them. When she was 5, she walked out under the corral rail, small as a fence post, and stood a full hour beneath the belly of a half-broke gelding no grown man in town would go near, and the horse, who had struck at every soul who came at it with a rope, lowered its head and breathed into her hair and stood quiet. Her mother came running, and then stopped dead and did not shout because she saw what she was looking at. She used to tell that story for years. She used to say the good Lord had given her daughter the one gift this country ran on and could never teach, and he had best have a reason for putting it in so small a girl. Fred did not understand her then. She would. Her mother died in the spring when Fred turned 15. A lung fever came off the wet March grass that year, quiet at first and then everywhere, and it took the young along with the old and gave no account of itself. Some griefs cool slowly, ember by ember. This one came in 11 days, from the first chill to the last long breath, and then the plank house that had never once been unkind was suddenly empty in a way that no fire could reach. Fred kept sewing because it was the trade her mother had left in her hands, and because those hands, like her mother's, did not know how to be still. But she was 15 and alone, and a girl alone on the Montana grass is a thing that other people take it upon themselves to settle. The Methodist minister and his wife took her in, not from love, but because the town would have murmured if no one had, and a minister must be seen to do the thing the town expects. She was not wanted in that house, and she knew it, and she made herself small and useful, and paid her keep in mending and washing, and never let a complaint past her teeth, because complaint, she had learned young, only hands a grudging house the excuse it has been hunting for, and she took work where she could, and the work she loved, the only work that ever felt like her own, was down at the livery. The liveryman's name was Ignatius Hoate, an old horse trader gone gray in the trade, and he saw in the silent, watchful girl who could gentle a spoiled colt with the flat of her hand something no rope and no whip had ever bought him, and he took the time with her that no one else in Reigate had. He taught her the true things, how to read a horse's eye and the set of its ears, how to float a bad tooth and pare a foundered hoof, how to sit a green one so it forgot to be afraid. He taught her leather too, the saddler's craft, how to skive and stitch and oil a harness so it would outlast the man who wore it. And he taught her that every creature and every made thing has a grain to it, a way it wants to go, and the whole art of a good life is learning to work with the grain instead of against it. You don't break a good horse, he told her once, running his thumb down a colt's neck. You just show it there was never anything to fight. She did not know then how far down into her own life those words would ride. She would. She saved what little she could. She kept it in a Watkins liniment tin, a flat red tin that never quite lost the camphor smell, no matter how she aired it, hidden in the ticking of her cot. By 17, she had $30 in it. By 18, she had close to 50. And a week after her 18th birthday, the minister's wife found the tin, and found in it some small offense that was not about the money at all, but about 3 years of a girl in a house that had never made room for her, and by dark Fred stood out on the frozen road in front of the parsonage with her flour sack bundle and her liniment tin and her mother's tin thimble, and the door of the only shelter she had swung shut at her back, and this time the latch fell and held. She had been thrown out. There is no softer word for it, and she did not go looking for one. Old Hote found her there in the blue cold of that evening, and he did not tell her he was sorry, which she was grateful for, because sorry was the one thing all of Reigate had in abundance. Instead, he told her about a place 2 days' ride south and west, a cattle town called Coldwater, that the drought and the hard winters had all but emptied, where he had traded horses in his young years, and where, he said, the buildings stood open, and the county would hand them over near enough for nothing to any fool willing to shoulder the back taxes. He said the old livery down there was still standing. He said if she wanted to make a life around horses and leather with no man's leave but her own, that was the place to go do it. She had not planned to go anywhere. But standing in the dark with all she owned in a flour sack and $40-odd in a liniment tin, she found she had nothing left to plan toward. And so the next morning she caught the southbound stage. The road down was long, and it changed the world by slow degrees. Reigate's flat home grass rolled away behind, and the country opened wider still, the way only Montana opens, until the land was nothing but grass and sky sewn together at a seam so far off it seemed the edge of the world. Buffalo grass and blue grama ran silver under the wind. Antelope lifted their heads to watch the coach, and then flowed away over a rise like water poured downhill. The air smelled of cured grass and sage and dust, and faint and cold off the far blue line of the mountains, the first breath of the snow that never entirely left the high peaks. A single hawk hung a long time over the road, riding the wind without a wing beat. Fred watched all of it through the coach window with the fierce, memorizing attention she gave to anything she meant to keep. She had never crossed this stretch of grass in her life, but some part of her seemed to have always known its shape, the way a good hand knows the temper of a horse before ever laying rein to it. Coldwater, when she reached it at dusk on the second day, was a town the cattle boom had built and the drought had hollowed. One wide main street of false-fronted buildings, more than half of them shuttered and gray. A church with the paint gone. A shut bank, a dead saloon, a mercantile with its windows soaped over. Hote's old friend met her at the stage, a broad, slow, quiet man named Ludwig, who kept a smithy and a lifetime's knowledge of every barn and beam in that country, and who said little on the walk down the street, and let the cold, clean prairie dusk carry the talk for him. At the low end of town, where the buildings gave out against the open grass, he stopped and lifted his chin toward a long, low barn standing off by itself, and he said, "That one, that's the one your hote wrote me you'd come to see." It was the Livery, a long timber-framed stable, built the old honest way of squared logs and hand-hewn posts, with a wide central runway and a row of box stalls down either side, and a full hayloft riding above the whole of it under a steep shake roof. The roof had rotted through in 2 places where the shakes had gone, and half the stall partitions had fallen, and the big sliding door hung off its track at a broken angle. But the frame, when Fred laid her hand along the nearest post, was sound, hand-hewn fir, mortised and pegged by someone who had known exactly what he was doing and had raised the thing to stand 100 winters. The great tie beams overhead were true. The stone footings were deep and level. Whoever had built this barn had built it to outlast every horse that ever stood in it and every man who ever forked hay down from its loft. "Whose was it?" she asked. Ludwig scratched his jaw. "Belonged to the old liveryman here, name of Silas Thorne." "No, I misremember. Cornelius Add, they called him. Ran it for nearly 40 years, all through the trail drive days when this was a shipping town and the herds came up the trail by the thousand. Best hand with a horse anybody down here ever saw. Died, must be 25 years gone now. The winter the big herds stopped coming. No wife, no kin anyone ever knew of. Counties held it for the taxes ever since." He looked at her sidelong. "Taxes come to $10 even. Nobody's wanted it in all that time. Folks say a barn where many animals lived and died is bound to hold on to something." $10, she said. $10, he said. "And more work alone than a body your size ought to take on." The next morning, she walked to the little county office and counted 10 worn dollars out of her liniment tin onto the clerk's counter, unknotting them one at a time from the corner of her shawl. The clerk, a tired man with a green eyeshade, looked at the money, then at the girl, and asked was she sure. Land didn't go for $10. $10 was a good pair of boots, which meant one of 2 things. Either the whole thing was a mistake, or the place was so worthless that in 25 years not one living soul had wanted it. "It's what I've got," Fred said, "and it's what I want." Something behind the man's tired eyes gave way. He drew the papers and turned them, and she signed her name in her mother's soft, coaxing hand, and when it was done, he reached under the counter and set a heavy iron key on the wood between them, black with age and cold as a well chain in her palm. "Come with the deed," he said. "Been in that drawer 25 years. It's yours now." And that key, cold and black and heavy in her hand, was the first thing in the whole wide world that belonged to Winifred Barlow and to no other living person. If you're already caught up in Fred's story, do us one small kindness and hit that subscribe button. It truly is the thing that keeps stories like this one being told. She walked out to the livery that same afternoon, the iron key heavy in her shawl, her breath smoking white in the thin, cold prairie air. Up close the barn was both worse and better than it had looked from the street. Worse, because 2 winters of snow had come through the rotted roof and blackened the runway floor beneath, and the fallen stalls lay in a jackstraw heap. Better, because the great frame, when she leaned her whole weight against a post and pushed, did not give a hair. Hand-hewn fir, mortised and pegged and true to the plumb after 40 years and 25 more of standing empty. She walked the whole of it before she said a word, reading the frame the way old Hote had taught her to read a horse. For the sound thing under the sorry-looking one, and under all its ruin the barn was sound to the bone. Whoever had raised it honestly. At the door she stopped. The old lock on the tack room within was seized with rust, and for a long moment The key would not so much as turn, and she thought she had crossed 2 days of grass to buy a door that would never open. She set her shoulder to it and worked the key slowly, not forcing it, the way Hote had shown her to work, with a frightened animal, patience, and a little oil and time. And just when she'd nearly given it up, the wards turned with a deep iron groan, and the bolt drew back. The great sliding door she muscled back along what was left of its track, shrieking. 25 years of silence tearing open all at once, and the shut-in breath of the place rolled out over her. Old hay and dust and leather and the deep animal ghost smell that soaks forever into the wood of any barn that has kept horses for 40 years. She stood in the wide doorway with the low sun at her back, throwing her shadow long down the dark runway, and then she stepped inside. The barn ran away before her into shadow, the stalls standing open down both sides, the loft riding overhead in dusty gloom, broken hams, and a coil of dry-rotted rope still hanging on a peg where some hand had left them a quarter-century gone. It was a wreck, but it was hers, and it was standing, and the bones of it were true. She turned slowly in the middle of the runway, and she felt the shape of the life that might be lived here settle down over her, the way a good saddle settles onto a horse that was built to carry it. That first night she slept in the sound end of the loft in her bedroll, a small fire of broken shake going safe in an old wash boiler she'd found, and the prairie outside was loud with sounds she had never heard from a bed of her own. The wind running endless through the grass, a coyote calling far off, and another answering, the small settling ticks of an old barn learning it was no longer alone. She lay awake a long while, and somewhere deep in the night the fear went out of her, and something steadier came in behind it. Something that felt, almost, like a green horse deciding at last that there had never been anything to fight. She began the next morning up in the loft, because the loft was where she'd slept, and a body ought to know the ground it lies on. Much of the loft floor was sound, but back under the low eaves on the north end, where the light didn't reach and the old hay lay drifted deep, her boot came down on a board that gave with a soft, wrong knock, hollow, not the dead give of rot, but the clean flex of a fitted panel. She swept the old hay back with her hands and brought the lantern close, and she found that the boards under the eaves there were not pegged down like the rest of the loft floor. They were laid loose over a framed opening, cut clean, meant to lift. Underneath was a hidden bin, built down between the joists, and set into it a small iron-strapped chest. She knelt over it for a long moment in the lantern light. Then she climbed down the loft ladder and went to find Ludwig, because there are some things a person ought not open entirely alone. He came back and climbed the ladder after her, and looked a long while at the chest down in the hidden bin and scratched his jaw the way he did. "Cornelius Ade," he said quietly, "handled every dollar that moved through this shipping town in the trail days. Livery fees, horse trades, the drover's keep, all of it in coin, and the nearest honest bank a hard 4 days off. Folks always wondered where his takings went. Never spent, never banked that anybody knew. Nobody asked him. He wasn't the man you asked." He looked down at the strapped lid. "Reckon we just found where he kept it." They lifted the chest up out of the bin between them, and it came heavy, that dense, unmistakable heaviness of metal that nothing else in the world quite counterfeits. They set it on the sound loft floor in the one bar of light that came through the roof, and the little padlock was rusted to lace. She struck it off with a hoof nipper, and it fell away, and she lifted the lid. Coins, gold on the top, wrapped in oilcloth, gone stiff as a board, double eagles, half eagles, their milled edges still sharp under the dust. Silver beneath, old worn dollars smoothed by dead men's hands, and under the coin, folded flat and banded, a thick sheaf of paper, trail days banknotes and greenbacks tied with a leather wang. But It was not one hoard thrown in together. She saw as she lifted it out handful by careful handful. It was ordered, sorted. Down in the bottom of the chest, the coin was laid in small canvas pokes, and every poke was tagged in faded ink with a year, and the years ran back in an unbroken line. 1868, 1869, 1870. One poke for every year the old man had kept the livery, a little laid by out of each season's trade, and set down here in the dark of his own loft instead of trusted to any bank that might fail, as so many out here did. Some pokes were heavy. The one marked 1874, a big shipping year, strained its stitches. Some were near the flat. The poke marked 1864, a hard winter, held only a coin or two. 20-odd years of them. 20-odd winters of a careful man's honest saving. Fred sat down on the loft floor, with a double eagle cold and bright in her palm, and her throat went tight, and she did not cry. But it was a near thing. Ludwig said nothing. There was nothing worth saying over it. They counted the better part of 2 days, and when they were done, and an honest coin man had driven up from the county seat and weighed the gold on his own scale and read her fair figures, the whole of it, gold and silver and note together, came to a little better than $9,000, more money than Winifred Barlow had ever let herself imagine holding in one whole life. But it was not the money that undid her. Down at the very bottom of the chest, beneath the last canvas poke, lay a flat packet of oilcloth, and folded inside it a small bundle of letters, tied with a bootlace, and one sheet, folded over on itself, its wax seal, cracked with the years, addressed in a plain, square hand, "To the one who finds my loft." Fred broke what was left of the seal with fingers that would not quite hold steady, and opened the sheet, and read it there on the loft floor in the swinging lantern light. "My name is Cornelius Ade," it began. "I was born in Ohio in the year 1826, and came west to a young man with a good hand for horses, and not $1 to bless myself with. I raised this barn with my own 2 hands and the help of a Norwegian carpenter in the year 1859, and I have kept it near 40 years. And in all that time no horse ever left my care worse than it came, which is a thing I hold worth more than everything in this chest, though I do not look for the world to credit it. Whoever you are, the money in my loft is not the treasure. It never was. It is only what I could not bring myself to spend, laid by a little each year. And it has done me not one lick of good sitting up here in the dark while I grew old and alone below it. I always told myself I was saving it toward something. I never once said what something was. That was the whole of my mistake, and I have had a long, cold time up in this country to come to know it. If you have found this, then you climbed into my loft for a reason. Maybe you needed a place to stand in the world. Maybe you were building toward something. Maybe you were only lost, the way I was lost, the way I stayed, lost a good deal longer than any soul ought to. I was every one of those things once. I hope this serves you the way I never let it serve me. Do not mind the chest so close that you forget to gentle the days. The days are the thing. I learned it too late. You need not. The barn is honest and well-framed, and she will stand another 100 winters if you keep the roof on her. Some barns are like that. Some lives could be, if only we would let them. Gentle her. Cornelius A.D. His hand. November 1873. Fred read it twice. Then she folded it careful and held it in her lap, and sat a long time in the cold quiet of the loft the old man had raised. And she thought about her mother, talking soft to her sewing, and a colt lowering its head into a 5-year-old's hair while the whole town held its breath, and old Oat running his thumb down a green neck, telling her there was never anything to fight. And she thought about Cornelius Ade, dead a quarter century, the best hand with a horse this country ever saw, who had gentled 40 years of frightened animals, and never once thought to gentle his own hard days, and who had died old and alone below a loft full of gold he never let himself want. And she understood, sitting there in the hay, a thing she would carry to the end of her own days, that the coin in the loft was the smallest part of what the old man had left her. He had left her a place to stand. The money was not the treasure. The money was only the key. Months later, the livery was a different barn, and Winifred Barlow was a different woman. She did the work right because Hote had taught her that a thing done true once will outlast a thing done fast a dozen over. She used a little of the gold and left the rest banked in the county seat, drawing only what the work called for. She stripped the failed shakes and split new ones from a fir Ludwig, helped her fall, riving them out true with a froe and a mallet the old way. And she laid a fresh roof against the prairie sky. She reset the great sliding door on the new iron track. She tore out the fallen partitions and built new box stalls of clean sawn plank, rubbed smooth so no horse would ever take a splinter. She relaid the black rotted runway in fresh adized fir, and she rebuilt the tack room into a proper saddler's shop, a bench and a stitching horse and a rack of half-moon knives and awls, and she oiled the old broken hames back to supple life and hung them where a working set of harness ought to hang. She kept the hidden bin. She never filled it, and she never covered it back over. She liked knowing it was there and what it had held. She kept one empty poke, too, the one marked 1859, the year the barn was raised, and set it on a shelf by the stitching horse with the old man's letter folded inside, beside her mother's neatest stipple. She did not transform the livery. She restored it. There is a difference, and the difference is the whole of the thing. The people of Coldwater came around slow, the way grass country people do. First, they were curious. Then they were neighborly. Then one morning they had simply decided she belonged, which is the dearest coin such people spend and the hardest to come by. Ludwig's wife, a small, stout woman named Birgit, took to bringing a covered pail of barley soup down the street every Sunday and would take no pay for it. "You eat that, Genta," she'd say. "You are too thin for these winters." An ancient trail cook named Dutch, who'd fed the drives in the boom and known Cornelius Aid to nod to, came and sat on an upturned bucket in the runway of an evening and told her the things the old man had told no one. Anne asked about the woman in Ohio who had married another while he was away making his stake, about the old blue tick hound named Chandler that had slept in the tack room 40 years and lay buried now under the cottonwood by the water trough. Fred wrote some of it down in a little book she kept in the poke on the shelf, building the portrait of a man she had never met out of the scraps that had outlived him. And she reopened the livery, not as it had been. The great trail drives were 25 yards dead and would never come booming up out of the south again, but as a place. Word ran out across the grass and down the lonesome ranch roads that the young woman at the Coldwater barn could gentle a horse. No man could touch and stitch a harness that would outlast the team, and they came, from failing homesteads and far line camps in 3 counties around, leading spoiled colts on the end of a rope and hauling in split saddles and broken traces, and she took each one in hand, slow, working with the grain and never against it, and she showed the frightened ones there had never been anything to fight, the way her mother always swore the Lord had built her to do. Some of the horses were near ruined when they came. She gentled them anyhow. A good hand does not know how to quit on a creature that can still be reached. One evening in the late gold of autumn, she sat on the water trough she had rebuilt with her own 2 hands and watched the light run long and amber across 1,000 miles of grass, and the old blue tick's great-grandpup dozed at her boot. And she thought about all of it, about her mother talking soft to her sewing, who had told the story of the colt and the 5-year-old for years, because she had already seen the shape of her daughter's whole life in it. About old Hote, running his thumb down a green neck, who had taught her that you do not break a good horse. You only show it there was never anything to fight. About Cornelius Ade, a quarter-century in the ground, the best hand this country ever saw, who had learned too late the one thing he never thought to be gentle. There is a pull that runs in some of us, quiet and old, long before we have the words to give it a name. We cannot always say why we want what we want, nor where the wanting means to carry us. But the pull is real, and if you follow it far enough, it tends, in the end, to bring you somewhere. For some, that somewhere is a place they are born to. For others, it is a place they must go out and find, across 2 days of grass, through a shrieking door, up a loft ladder into the dark under the eaves that a quarter-century of townsfolk swore held nothing at all, a place near everyone else has already given up on. The shape of it does not matter. What matters is whether you can stand inside it, look around you, and feel something come quiet and settle in your chest at last. Something that says this: this is the place. This is where I begin. Winifred Barlow was 18 years old and thrown out with nothing. 10 worn dollars knotted in the corner of her shawl, and she spent them on a broken-down livery the whole town swore was worthless. It was the best $10 she ever spent, and not, in the end, for the coin in the loft. For the door it opened. If this story moved you tonight, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell us down in the comments, what's the frightened, broken-down thing in your own life you managed to gentle instead of fight? We read everyone, and we would love to hear your story. See you in the next one.